Do you see a replay of what happened in the lead up to the war with Iraq? The allegations of the weapons of mass destruction, the media leaping on to the bandwagon?
Well, in a way, but you know, history doesn't repeat itself exactly twice. What I did warn about when I testified in front of Congress in 2002, I said, if you want to worry about a state, it shouldn't be Iraq, it should be Iran. But this government, our administration, wanted to worry about Iraq, not Iran. I knew why, because I'd been through the Pentagon right after 9/11. About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
False atrocity stories would become a staple for nations in wartime throughout the 20th century. The recent example occurred prior to the first Gulf War.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, took the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
As it turns out, the massacre of babes never occurred. The young girl was actually a member of the Kuwaiti royal family and had been coached by the public relations firm Hill and Knowlton to give persuasive false testimony.
Kids in incubators, and they were thrown out of the incubators so that Kuwait could be systematically dismantled.
The attempt to engender hatred against Germans in support of the war effort was highly successful. But there was another, equally important aspect to the domestic propaganda campaign. If every adventure story needs a villain, it also needs a hero. April 9th, 2003. Throngs of Iraqis spontaneously attack a statue of Saddam Hussein, the face obscured with Old Glory. Later, the stars and stripes are replaced with red, white, and black, symbolizing the transference of power from the liberators to the liberated. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld describes the scenes as breathtaking. To the British Army, they are historic. BBC Radio calls them amazing. And they were, because the entire event was staged. Years after the operation, a U.S. Army report admitted that the toppling of the Saddam statue had been engineered by a psychological operations group. The document states, "Our TPT, or Tactical PSYOP team, saw the statue as a target of opportunity." A week earlier, another psychological operation laid the groundwork for what followed. The script was for a female Rambo turned damsel in distress to be rescued by U.S. armed forces.
In the situation that we're talking about here with Private Lynch, as you know, on about the 23rd of March, her 507th Maintenance Company was ambushed. A number of the members of that maintenance company were killed, a number were captured, and a number were unaccounted for, she being one of them.
We waited 24 hours to get the cameras there to set up the whole thing to make this big rescue, and the SWAT team goes in to save her, and then she becomes an instant celebrity overnight. That story happened the same day that the tanks were rolling into Baghdad. This is the same day that we shelled the Palestine hotel where the independent journalists were. The same day we blew up Al Jazeera's television station. And killed one of their journalists. What we're getting on the front pages of the papers and in the news is the rescue of Jessica Lynch. So that was a PR substitute story. Toppling the Saddam statue, they got Shalabi's group. The Rennan group had actually formed them. The CIA had paid the Rennan group to form the Iraqi Congress as a counter group to Saddam Hussein, and they were based here in the U.S. Then they flew them over there and they shipped them into Iraq. They were the ones that were standing around the statue as, you know, a tank was used to pull it over. The Rennan group had been around. He worked for George W.'s father, and he worked for Clinton too. His firm, he used to be a public relations press guy for Carter, and he created a PR firm that specialized in war.
The head of the Rendon Group, John Rendon, denies that he is a national security strategist or a military tactician. Rather, he states, "I am a politician and a person who uses communication to meet public policy or corporate policy objectives. In fact, I am an information warrior and a perception manager." Following the first Gulf War, Rendon was paid $23 million by the CIA to create anti-Saddam propaganda. Following 9/11, he was charged with public relations for the U.S. bombing of Afghanistan. Rendon is far from alone. Public relations has mushroomed into a $200 billion a year industry, with PR flacks in the United States now outnumbering journalists. Propaganda has become the primary means by which the wealthy communicate with the rest of society. Whether selling a product, a political candidate, a law, or a war, seldom do the powerful deliver messages to the public before consulting their colleagues in the public relations industry.
Earlier tonight, I spoke to retired four-star General Wesley Clark, who served as NATO Supreme Allied Commander and is a former candidate for the Democratic Party's nomination for president. He's also author of Don't Wait for the Next War, a strategy for American growth and global leadership. And wait until you hear what he had to say on this. General, great to see you.
Thank you, Megan.
When General Keane says that radical Islam is the enemy, do you agree?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Jack Keane says. He's an old friend of mine, and he's a very smart and experienced leader. Now, I think we do have a real threat from extremist interpretations of Islam that are reflected by groups like ISIS. But it's also true that there's a tremendous geostrategic struggle going on in the Middle East right now.
Okay, but before we get to that, because I just want to start with the question of, because we heard this from General Flynn, who ran the DIA. I mean, this is a big agency. This is the brother to the CIA. He ran the agency. He recently retired over the summer and slammed the administration for not using the term Islamic militants. And he said, we cannot defeat an enemy that you do not admit exists. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree with that. But I think it's not just radical Islam, because radical Islam is used. We, the United States, used radical Islam to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. We begged the Saudis to put the money in. They did.
But that's...
Megan, this is all part of this.
What these guys seem to be saying is we have an administration now that won't even call it what it is. Out of political correctness, out of fear of offending somebody, Keane believes out of just fear about what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that we cannot be controlled by fear right now in facing this enemy.
Well, of course we can't be controlled by fear. But you're not going to deal effectively with this threat unless you understand what the source of it is. It's not just the zealousness of radical Islam. It's fed and fueled by the geostrategic ambitions of powers in the region.
But
They're reaching out.
What he was trying to say, as our viewers watch this segment, we got a lot of feedback on it. What General Keane was trying to say is that the policy that he says has failed, that these other generals say has failed, is retreat, disengagement. And he went through the examples. Let's just go through it quickly. Did we miss an opportunity in Syria or didn't we?
We could have done a lot more with the moderate Syrians than we did.
Did we miss an opportunity in Libya or did we not?
You know, the trouble in Libya was we had partial opposition, but it wasn't a strong and unified opposition.
Should we have supported them when they asked for support of a moderate security force? We did? So General Keane is wrong on that?
That's right. We did support them.
Should we have left any residual force in Iraq? Should we have left anybody there to maintain the gains our troops had won?
I would like to have kept a residual force in Iraq if we had the right status of forces agreement. But what you have to understand about this criticism is that it was Iran behind the scenes with the Maliki regime, which no matter what the United States had done with the negotiations, Iran was going to find a way to wedge us out.
Why make it easy for them? Here's the question.
So,
why won't the administration refer to it as radical Islam?
You're going to have to ask a spokesman for the administration.
Are they wrong not to?
Well, you're going to have to ask
But
them.
I'm asking you, are they wrong not to?
Radical Islam, but
why are they being too politically correct? Because it irritates people when they see that 6 out of 10 Americans know where.
I want them to understand.
No, General Clark.
This is
6
not
out of 10
about
Americans
religion.
know.
This is about
yes, it is about religion. It's about perverted religious ideology.
It isn't.
Yes, it is. Don't tell me this has nothing to do with Islam. It does.
It's being. Yes, of course. But let me explain what people in the region will tell you. If you ask them, say, what's going on with ISIS? You know what they'll tell you? They'll say very candidly, the only people that will fight the Iranians and the Shia and Hezbollah are these zealous religious nuts. And all the Sunni powers were using them. They created a Frankenstein in the region.
Given, however, that Saddam Hussein did not prove to have weapons of mass destruction, was the decision to enter Iraq and topple his regime a mistake?
You know, whenever I'm asked this, I can say that I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we received was wrong, because even though he had used chemical weapons extensively against his own people, against others, the program in the form that we thought it was did not exist in the way that we thought. So I can apologize for that. I can also apologize, by the way, for some of the mistakes in planning and certainly our mistake in our understanding of what would happen once you removed the regime. But I find it hard to apologize for removing Saddam. I think even from today in 2015, it is better that he's not there than that he is there.
When people look at the rise of ISIS, many people point to the invasion of Iraq as the principal cause. What do you say to that?
I think there are elements of truth in that, but I think we've, again, got to be extremely careful, otherwise we'll misunderstand what's going on in Iraq and in Syria today. Of course, you can't say that those of us who removed Saddam in 2003 bear no responsibility for the situation in 2015, but it's important also to realize, one, that the Arab Spring, which began in 2011, would also have had its impact on Iraq today, and two, ISIS actually came to prominence from a base in Syria and not in Iraq. And that leads me to the broader point, which I think is so essential when we're looking at policy today, which is we have tried intervention and putting down troops in Iraq. We've tried intervention without putting in troops in Libya. And we've tried no intervention at all but demanding regime change in Syria. Right? It's not clear to me that even if our policy did not work, subsequent policies have worked better.